I specialize in nutritional medicine for men's health, and I want to tell you something that most men over 60 have never been told in a doctor's office. The loss of erectile firmness and the gradual decline in blood flow that you may be experiencing right now is not simply hormonal. It is, in large part, structural. And the structure I am talking about is collagen. The scientific literature has been building on this connection for years. What I see in clinical practice confirms it in a way that statistics alone cannot. Men who are eating well by every conventional measure, exercising, keeping their weight in check, and still experiencing progressive loss of erectile quality and reduced peripheral circulation. Not because their hormones were catastrophically low, not because they had a cardiovascular event, but because one specific category of nutrition was almost completely absent from their diet, and nobody had ever flagged it. Today, I am going to explain what this food category does inside your arteries and your erectile tissue, why its absence accelerates a type of degradation that no standard blood panel will show you, and what you can do starting this week to reverse the trend. This is one of the most practical episodes I have recorded on this channel, and I ask that you watch it to the end. There is one thing I want to say before we go any further. A significant number of the men who come to my practice after 60, I would estimate more than half, are eating diets that look perfectly reasonable on the surface. Adequate protein, reasonable fat distribution, vegetables, not too much sugar. And yet, when I dig into the specific amino acid profile of what they are consuming day to day, there is a consistent gap. They are getting enough protein to maintain muscle. They are not getting the specific building blocks that the vascular wall, the penile smooth muscle, and the connective tissue around the corpus cavernosum need to stay elastic and functional. That gap does not show up on a standard metabolic panel. It does not show up on a testosterone test. It accumulates quietly, and men feel it before they can name it. If you have noticed that your erections are less firm than they were a few years ago, or that your hands or feet go cold more easily, or that your recovery from exertion takes longer, I want you to stay with me, because what I am about to explain directly connects to all three of those things. Now let me explain why collagen matters to your erections in a way that goes beyond anything your doctor has probably told you. The corpus cavernosum, the erectile tissue that fills with blood to produce an erection, is not simply a passive sponge. It is a highly structured matrix of smooth muscle cells embedded in a collagen scaffold. For an erection to form and be maintained, that scaffold has to be elastic enough to expand under arterial pressure. When the collagen matrix degrades, and it degrades progressively after 50, accelerating significantly after 60, the tissue loses compliance. It becomes stiffer in the way that works against you. It resists filling rather than accommodating it. The result is erections that are slower to develop, less complete in rigidity, and shorter in duration, even when hormonal levels are adequate and arterial inflow is normal. This is a structural problem, not purely a chemical one. The same process happens in the vascular wall. Collagen is the primary scaffolding protein in the tunica media, the middle layer of every artery in your body. A healthy tunica media means arteries that dilate efficiently in response to blood flow signals and return to resting tone without calcifying. As collagen quality declines, the arterial wall becomes less responsive. Peripheral circulation suffers first. The smaller the vessel, the earlier it feels the degradation. This is why reduced penile blood flow and cold extremities often appear together in men in their late 50s and 60s. They share the same root. Collagen turnover has slowed, and fibrotic replacement has begun. A research review published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences documented that collagen type 1 and type 3, the two predominant structural proteins in vascular and erectile tissue, undergo progressive fragmentation after 55, with the rate of synthesis declining faster than the rate of degradation in men with low dietary glycine intake. Glycine is the most abundant amino acid in collagen. The body synthesizes some of it, but in men over 50, endogenous synthesis is insufficient to maintain tissue turnover at the rate needed to offset age-related degradation. The deficit has to come from diet, and most Western diets, built around lean muscle cuts and processed proteins, are severely deficient in glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, the three amino acids that form the collagen triple helix, and that the body cannot adequately substitute. The most common mistake I see in men who try to address this on their own is focusing exclusively on protein quantity. They increase chicken breast, eggs, protein powders. All of that is useful for muscle. Almost none of it contributes meaningfully to connective tissue and vascular collagen synthesis. The amino acid profile is entirely different. You can eat 200 grams of protein per day from lean sources and still be profoundly deficient in the specific building blocks your arteries and erectile tissue require. The solution is not more protein. It is the right kind of protein. Before I go into the specific foods and how to incorporate them, there is something I need to say, because leaving it out would mean I am giving you only part of the picture. I have spent most of my career insisting that a properly structured dietary protocol is sufficient. That was my clinical position for a long time, and it came from genuine conviction. I believed that if a man ate correctly, exercised consistently, and managed his stress, supplementation was unnecessary. I held that position even when colleagues began incorporating nutritional supplements because I had seen too many products that were, at best, redundant, and at worst, substitutes for the behavioral changes that actually moved markers. What made me revise that position was not a product. It was a pattern I kept seeing in a specific subgroup of patients. Men between 55 and 63 who were following dietary protocols correctly, getting adequate protein, eating the collagen-rich foods I was recommending, and still showing a slower than expected improvement in erectile quality and peripheral circulation. These were not men who were cutting corners. Their dietary logs were consistent. Their adherence was not the problem. The problem was a physiological limitation I had not adequately accounted for. The enzymatic pathways required to synthesize and cross-link collagen, particularly the hydroxylation steps mediated by prolyl hydroxylase and lysyl hydroxylase, decline with age and require specific cofactors that dietary protein alone does not provide at sufficient concentrations. The gap was not in the raw material, it was in the synthesis machinery. I began researching formulations with documented support for these pathways. What I found, and subsequently began testing in clinical practice, was a combination that included two compounds I want to explain specifically, because the mechanism matters. The first is saw palmetto. Most men associate this with prostate support, and that association is not wrong. But the mechanism relevant to this episode is different. Saw palmetto inhibits the enzyme 5-alpha reductase, which converts free testosterone into dihydrotestosterone. This matters here because testosterone is the primary hormonal driver of collagen synthesis in vascular smooth muscle. When too much bioavailable testosterone is being diverted into DHT, a conversion that accelerates after 50, less is available to maintain the collagen turnover signals in the arterial wall and erectile tissue. Preserving free testosterone in its active form means preserving the hormonal stimulus for the structural maintenance you need. The second is forskolin, the active compound derived from the Coleus forskolii root. Forskolin activates an enzyme called adenylate cyclase in the Leydig cells of the testes, the cells responsible for testosterone production. This activation increases intracellular signaling that prompts endogenous testosterone synthesis. In the context of this episode, this matters because it addresses the hormonal foundation that collagen synthesis depends on. not through external hormone supplementation, but by stimulating the body's own production machinery. What I observed in men between 55 and 63 who incorporated this combination alongside the dietary changes was a more consistent improvement in erectile quality and peripheral warmth than diet alone produced, typically becoming perceptible in the 6-week range, and more marked in the subgroup whose baseline collagen intake had been lowest. Not every patient responded with equal speed, but the pattern was consistent enough that I have kept it in the protocol I recommend to men in this age group. This is not a medication. It is nutritional support for pathways that decline with age, with a documented mechanism and, in the case of the formulation I use, verified composition free of synthetic compounds. I looked at the purity documentation before including it in any recommendation I make to patients. The link is in the video description for those who want to review the ingredient profile at their own pace. Now, the foods you can start incorporating today. The single most concentrated dietary source of the amino acids your vascular and erectile collagen needs is something most men stopped eating years ago, often for reasons that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with convenience. Bone broth. Not stock, not bouillon cubes, not flavored powders. Slow-simmered bone broth from joints and marrow bones, cooked for a minimum of 10 to 12 hours until the gelatin content is high enough to solidify slightly in the refrigerator. This gelatin is the pre-digested form of collagen. When the proteins in connective tissue are broken down by prolonged heat, the resulting gelatin delivers glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline in forms that are immediately available to your intestinal cells. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that post-exercise collagen synthesis in tendons and connective tissue was significantly greater in subjects who consumed gelatin-based protein compared to whey protein with identical caloric content. The mechanism is the amino acid composition, not the quantity of protein. For men over 60, I recommend 2 cups of genuine bone broth per day, 1 in the morning with breakfast and 1 in the evening with dinner. It should be made from joints, chicken feet, beef knuckles, pork trotters, or marrow bones. These have the highest collagen density. If you are sourcing commercial broth, the standard I use in practice is this. If it does not gel when refrigerated, the collagen concentration is too low to be therapeutically meaningful. It will taste fine and hydrate you. It will not move the needle on your vascular or erectile tissue matrix. The second food is one that most men recognize but rarely eat in adequate quantity: sardines with bones. This matters not just for the omega-3 content, though that is relevant to vascular inflammation, but because the small, soft bones contain significant hydroxyproline and mineral cofactors, particularly phosphorus and calcium, in the ratios that support the mineralization step in collagen stabilization. The connective tissue surrounding those small bones is also among the most bioavailable sources of marine collagen peptides available in a whole food format. 2 to 3 servings of bone-in sardines per week provides a consistent amino acid and mineral input your body can use directly for arterial wall maintenance. Men who tell me fish is expensive have not priced sardines recently. It is one of the most economical therapeutic foods available. The third practical item is vitamin C consumed in proximity to collagen-containing foods, and I want to explain why this is not optional. Prolyl hydroxylase, the enzyme that converts proline into hydroxyproline and initiates the collagen triple helix formation, is vitamin C dependent. It cannot function without it. Men who eat collagen-rich foods but are marginally deficient in vitamin C, and marginal deficiency is far more common after 60 than clinical deficiency, absorb the amino acids but cannot complete the synthesis step. The collagen precursors are there, the enzyme is stalled. Consuming 200 to 400 milligrams of vitamin C in the same meal as collagen-containing foods, whether that is a glass of fresh citrus juice with your bone broth or bell peppers with your sardines, closes this gap. This is not supplementation. This is cofactor timing. The research on this is not new. It has been in the biochemistry literature since the 1990s, but it has not made its way into the practical dietary advice most men receive. If you are finding this information useful, I would ask you to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs it, an older brother, a friend, someone whose doctor does not have time to explain what happens to their arterial collagen after 60. This kind of clinical information should be available outside the 15-minute office visit, and your sharing it is what makes that possible. The fourth guideline is about what to reduce, not add. Dietary advanced glycation end products, the compounds formed when protein reacts with sugar at high heat, producing the browned, caramelized, or charred exterior on grilled, fried, and ultra-processed foods, accelerate collagen cross-linking in a way that is structurally destructive. Normal collagen cross-linking is what gives connective tissue its tensile strength. AGE-mediated cross-linking is different. It produces stiff, brittle, poorly elastic fibers that resist both expansion and remodeling. In the arterial wall, this is part of the mechanism behind arteriosclerosis. In erectile tissue, it contributes directly to the loss of cavernous compliance I described earlier. A paper from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai demonstrated that men on low AGE diets showed measurable improvements in vascular wall flexibility within 6 to 8 weeks compared to controls. Reducing your intake of fried foods, processed meats, and foods cooked at very high dry heat, roasting, charring, frying, and replacing that cooking with poaching, steaming, slow cooking, and braising is one of the most direct structural interventions you can make for both your vascular and erectile health. It also, incidentally, increases the utility of bone broth and slow-cooked collagen-rich cuts in your diet. The method of preparation is not separate from the nutritional benefit. It is part of it. Now I want to give you the context that places all of this in the larger picture of what happens to a man's body when the collagen deficit goes unaddressed for years. The process I have been describing does not stay confined to the erectile tissue or the peripheral vessels. Progressive collagen degradation in the vascular wall is one of the primary contributors to the arterial stiffness that cardiologists measure as pulse wave velocity, a metric that predicts cardiovascular events more reliably than cholesterol levels alone in men over 55. When the aorta and its major branches lose their buffering elasticity, the heart works harder with every beat to push blood into a stiffer system. Blood pressure becomes more labile. The left ventricle hypertrophies over time. These are not theoretical outcomes. They are the predictable consequence of structural protein decline that was never addressed at the nutritional level. What clinical practice shows that studies do not capture is how often this process is reversible, or, at minimum, substantially slowed, when men intervene before the fibrotic replacement of collagen is too advanced. I have patients in their late 60s and early 70s who initiated these dietary changes, reduced their AGE load, incorporated the cofactor timing I described, and showed measurable improvements in their arterial compliance markers within 2 to 3 months. Not dramatic reversals, meaningful, trackable improvements on objective measures. The men who showed the least response were those who had waited too long, and in whom the fibrotic remodeling had already become the dominant tissue state. This is the clinical observation that I cannot find in a journal. The men who respond best are not the youngest or the fittest. They are the ones who acted early enough that the tissue still had plasticity. The men who ignored the early signals, the reduced erections, the cold extremities, the slower recovery, and treated them as inevitable features of aging, arrived at a point where the intervention was still useful, but the ceiling was considerably lower. Physical vitality after 60 is not a mystery or a lottery. It is the cumulative output of decisions made at the nutritional and structural level over years. A man who understands the mechanism has a meaningful advantage over one who is simply waiting to see what happens. To close this today, let me bring together what I have covered. The gradual decline in erectile quality and peripheral blood flow that men over 60 experience is not only hormonal and not only vascular in the conventional sense. It is, in significant part, the result of collagen degradation in the tissues that need to expand, flex, and remodel in order for those functions to work correctly. The specific amino acids required for collagen maintenance are absent from most modern diets. The cofactors required for collagen synthesis are often undertimed relative to dietary protein intake. And the compounds that accelerate structural degradation, dietary AGEs, are pervasive in the foods most men eat daily. All three of these are adjustable. Tell me in the comments, had you ever connected the quality of your erections with the structural state of your arterial and erectile tissue? Or was that connection new to you today? The body does not repair indefinitely on the same timeline at every age. The cavernous smooth muscle and the arterial wall have a remodeling capacity, a window in which nutritional intervention produces measurable structural response. But that window narrows as fibrotic accumulation outpaces the body's ability to turn over damaged tissue. The nutritional support I mentioned in this video, the combination I include in my protocol after reviewing the evidence and the purity, makes sense as part of this process because it addresses the hormonal foundation that collagen synthesis depends on. It does not replace the dietary changes. It supports the machinery that the dietary changes feed. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments for those who want to review the ingredient composition at their own pace. The most consistent thing I have observed across years of practice is this. The men who protect their structural health in their 50s have options in their 60s and 70s that men who waited simply do not. That is not a slogan. That is what the clinical data and the patients in front of me both confirm.